Hello.
Hi,
Hello, everyone out there, and hello to my special guest.
how we doing?
I'm doing very well. Um, Today we're doing something a little different on my channel is I'm talking to a friend of mine who is a police officer. And a topic that really interests me a lot is domestic violence, why women stay in domestic violence situations, why women get together with men in the first place, knowing that they're such a danger to them. And you being a police officer for 9 years,
Hmm.
is that right?
Yep.
You've had a lot of experience and you bring a different perspective than I think I have or anyone here has. So, we're going to be kind of diving deep into that subject of what is domestic violence, what makes it so dangerous for the police to respond to
Hmm.
domestic violence situations. And yeah, so let's get started. Our agenda for today, I'm going to introduce a little bit about my personal experiences with the police. I know that some people, when I brought up this topic, oh, I want to talk to my police officer friend, were a little bit um, kind of hostile to the idea. And I understand that because I really think that our experiences individually shape the way we think about a topic more than anything else. So I can read statistics about something all day, but what I've experienced firsthand is going to be the most important to like what I think about a topic. And I listen to women who've had difficult experiences with the police and I hear that. My experiences have been a little bit different. So I'm going to go over a few of those. Then I'm going to introduce you. We're going to go on a little deep dive about what domestic violence actually is. You're going to talk about some of your experiences responding to domestic violence calls, what
Hmm.
makes it such a dangerous job for cops to go on. We're going to talk a little bit about mutual abuse, that idea. Is it a myth? Is there something to it? How do you know who the victim is? And we're also going to talk about what makes women afraid to call the cops when they are actually being victimized. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a few of my personal experiences with the police. I understand it's a privilege to be able to view police as helpers. And police have that kind of multifaceted role in our society is that they are helpers, but they're also fighters. And in certain situations, they can even be the aggressor or the antagonist. And in my experiences, when I have gone to the police for things, I have felt very supported. Um, and that has shaped how I think about it. So, about many years ago, 8 or 9 years ago, I was sexually assaulted, actually battered by a stranger in public. I think you know that story when
Hmm.
I was out running.
Yeah.
And, I was I was like really traumatized by that, obviously. And I like even laid down on the side of the road and cried. And then the first thing I did after that was I went to the police station and reported it. And I think that was like really the first time that I ever really interacted with cops. And I had heard all these stories of, oh, they don't take this stuff seriously for women. And I kind of expected that. I kind of expected them to like maybe take a statement and then just sort of brush it off.
Hmm.
And they like went above and beyond. I gave them so little description to go on, and they still stationed a cop in that area every day for 3 weeks to see if they could find somebody like that to,
Interesting.
question or whatever. Yeah. And they were also calling me like every 2 or 3 days with an update, even though there was nothing really to update me on. So,
Yeah.
that happened in a small town in like a rural area where there's not a lot of crime and not a lot of stuff going on. And, but I felt like then I really saw them as a resource that I could go to if I was in trouble.
Hmm.
Um, another situation, and this was since you and I have been friends, and we've been friends for a long time, by the way.
Yep.
I was being stalked and threatened by my abusive ex-boyfriend, and it was going on for a long time, and I was complaining to you about it, and I was like, what do I do about this? And you encouraged me to go to the police in my town, and I did, and they took care of it, and I never heard from him again. I'm assuming they just reached out to him and kind of warned him of what could happen if he continued.
Yeah.
So that was another situation where I went there not knowing, like, are they going to laugh at me, or like, are they going to take this seriously? And they were just so helpful, and they just wanted to like nip the problem in the bud, you know?
Yeah.
And they did. So
Yeah.
those are just like a couple of my experiences, and they have been positive. And it's like, I'd like to encourage other women to go to the police, but I know that it's not everyone has those positive experiences.
Yeah.
It worked for me. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing about that is, I don't know if you remember, but so we set you up for success on that second thing, right? So I don't know if you remember, but we had you were getting like text message harassment and all that. We had you
Mhm.
directly state to him, I do not want any more conversation with you. I don't want you texting me, calling me. I don't want you. You need to leave me alone. You said that in very plain English to him, right? And that was something that you
Mhm.
printed out and brought to the cops. That I think allowed the cops to do their job. If you had just showed
Mhm.
up and said, hey, listen, I'm getting harassed by my boyfriend. Not that it's not taken seriously, but you and I have talked about this before. Is I won't say crimes, but things that the police deal with have to fit a definition. And if one of the things they'd probably ask you is, did you tell him to leave you alone? Right. And if you didn't
Mhm.
say, well, no, but he should know, or something like that, they
Mhm.
might send you back. They might send you back and say, well, first go tell him in plain English, do not text me anymore. And if he then continues to message you, now we can do something. But I think we set you up for success. I think that's important when dealing with the police, is to know what they're going to be looking for, which, not everybody knows, but um, if you know what they're going to be looking for in order to help you, it's going to help you tremendously.
Yeah, and you really gave me a lot of guidance on that, and like knowing what exact language to use to get the cops to do something was
Mhm.
really important. And just like you said, like knowing the procedurally, because like with getting a restraining order or something, it's like people don't really know the actual steps that you need to do to
Yeah,
achieve
yeah,
that.
yeah, and
But
it
yeah,
might be
you
yeah, sorry, it might be perceived as like the cops not caring if they had sent you back home, or them not taking it
mm,
seriously. But in reality, when they're sitting there on the other side of the table and they're listening to your story, they may need to hear key things from you that you either did or said, that allow them to do what they need to do on their end. So yeah, very important.
yeah, and I think that that might be kind of a theme in the discussion today is, when the legal system, if you want to call it that, like everything from cops up to through the courts up to legislation, like where are
Mhm.
women being failed? And a lot of the times, because the cops are like the first line, that, that's who you don't go and talk to your legislator. You know what I mean? You don't go and
Yeah,
talk to a judge, right? Like the what the civilian population has exposure to of that legal system, you're sort of like the tip of the iceberg. That's actually who you interact with. And
yeah,
so I do think that cops get blamed probably disproportionately because you're, again, I think there's a theme that will come up is you can be very limited by what you are, like the procedures that are in place.
yeah,
And you can be very limited by like what the law says you are capable of doing in a situation. And people will see that as the police failing, where really you're just at the bottom of this whole hierarchy and you're carrying out, kind of orders or whatever that are coming from higher up.
yep. everybody has their role, and I think we'll get into that probably later. But yeah, our role is very specific, and I think people think
Mm-hmm.
that that there's more interaction that happens, or more um, more that we get to do, and it's just not that's not a reality of policing. So we'll get into that, I guess.
Yeah, and something that's really interesting to me about police culture and like just the way the job works and everything is how it is a very like chain of command. Like you can't do anything that you're not authorized to do.
Yeah.
And you know, and it often is like the higher ups don't want to hear your feedback of how you could make things better. So
Yeah, absolutely.
am I right
Especially
about
in
that?
a larger,
Yeah.
yeah, especially in a larger department.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if you're, I'm gonna probably say this a lot, but like if you're out west in a 20-person police department, maybe you have direct access to the people at the top, and they're willing to listen and things like that. Um, as a
Yeah, and
good
it may be
supervisor, yeah.
yeah, in
But
like a smaller department, it may be maybe they want that. I mean, everyone has a different management style too, like there may be people who manage police officers who, they want to hear what's going on and like how the actual officers think they could make things better and stuff like that.
yeah,
But
and I guess
yeah.
no, I would say I don't know if people are aware, but and I don't know if this is the place to talk about it, but the patrol guide
Mhm.
is what directs police officers. It's not necessarily the law; it's our patrol guide, and that's written by the
Right.
legal department as well as the higher ups. It has nothing to do with the police.
Mm-hmm.
It's a guideline for what we need to do, and not much input is given from the police up, regardless of how much we would
Right.
want that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just speaking about another of my personal experiences, I applied to be a 911 operator
Mhm.
and in a couple different towns, and it was right at the beginning of COVID, and I ended up
Mhm.
I think I probably would have gotten the job at one of the places, but I was just like, no, this is like too hectic of a
I
time to be
remember.
doing this.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but in one interview that I had, it was like this very long table, and there were like maybe 8 people on one side of the table and me on the other side.
Mm.
But the guy who was like the captain of the fire department or something, he was like, asked me about, I forget what the question was, but I ended up saying something like, oh, like if I have feedback about how to make things better, or if I see something that could be improved, I always speak up and I always want to like change things and stuff. And
Yeah,
like all those 8 faces were all just like frowning so much because
yeah.
that's not what it's like. It's like they just want people who will do whatever they say and not question it. And so maybe you get to people with more of that personality type who are like willing to just, there are certain people who are like, oh, I want to be able to, and I wouldn't do well in a role like that. That's what I'm saying is like, because if I can't speak up and say like, hey, this is like, I want to change things or do things differently, and that's going to be frowned upon, I would not do well in that environment.
Mhm.
But not everybody's like that. So anyways, I'm going to introduce you now.
Ooh.
This is just a joke meme because you are actually not like that at all. And I think it was by knowing you that my opinion of what cops are changed a lot, because you are not what I think of when I think of like a stereotypical cop, right?
Probably not your standard cop, yeah.
Um, you're sort of politically like all over the place. You have some like pretty liberal views, and you have some not so liberal views. Someone asked me actually to speak on, or if we could speak on like what happens when you and I disagree on something, like politically or whatever. And basically, we
Mhm.
just have learned to not talk about very few certain topics, but we agree on a lot of stuff too.
Yeah, I think
Um,
so.
we're not going to get into it in this stream. Maybe in the future, if you come back, we can talk about it. But like, I'm very anti-gun, and you're very anti-gun, and
Mhm.
um,
Crazy, huh?
So I know it is crazy, but it kind of makes sense too, given that guns make your job so much more dangerous.
Yeah.
But yeah, so just to introduce you a little bit, we've been friends for quite a long time, and you are kind of a Renaissance man type person. You're a farmer. You're,
I thank you.
you know, build houses. What else? You have a lot of
Woodworking.
interests.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
try to stay with it. Hmm.
And
Um,
and being a cop is just in there, but it's
yeah,
also what you do
yeah,
every day. Um,
yeah.
I also want to mention that you were a patrol officer for 6 or 7 years.
Close to 7. Yep.
Yeah, and then you went through a long period of training, and now you are like a SWAT rescue full time. So some places only have, their regular police officers are also trained in that, but
Mhm.
that's your full time job now. So you only go out on heavy duty jobs now. Do
Yeah.
regular, you don't like patrol on the street, you don't wear a regular cop uniform. You're more
No,
like a
no patrol.
fireman, actually.
Yeah, very close to it. Yeah, yeah. So,
So is there anything you think we should know about you?
not necessarily. Just the real quick. I was in private sector for after college. I got a 4-year degree in college. After that, I spent
Hmm.
11 years in private sector. I'm not going to say what profession, but um, I was in private sector for 11 years, and then at a much later age than most people get on the job, I became a cop, and I've been on for 9 years, approximately 7 as patrol, and then we did just short of a year of training, about 10 months of training for the SWAT rescue, and I've been
Hmm.
in a SWAT rescue unit for about a year and a half. And what comes with that is ROCO certification, so high angle rope rescue, EMT certification, building collapse specialist, hazmat tech. Um, what else do we do? Auto extrication. We're trained in auto extrication. We're trained in animal control. Um, those are the big ones. We specialize. So part of what we do is as the SWAT there is a warrants unit specifically for warrants, but we will occasionally get a warrant that we have to do. So like a couple a month or
Hmm.
something like that, we'll execute warrants. Um, we deal
And
with
how about you have
mostly.
special training in like psychological intervention and stuff like that too, don't
Yeah,
you?
yeah. So I won't say which school it's through, but a university has done emotionally disturbed person training. You go for about 2 weeks, and you get high in-depth training with like real actors that act out um, like real scenarios and real uh, diagnosed mental illness, and you spend 2 weeks basically learning about them, and then also trying to work with them to get like voluntary compliance and as little
Hmm.
problems as you can out of them, so that you can get to your goal of getting them out of their most likely their apartment safely. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, so we deal with a lot of
And
emotional EDPs, emotionally disturbed people, EDPs that are barricaded,
hmm.
suspects that are armed, that are barricaded in their apartments or apartment stores or whatever. We deal with a lot of that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I did a stream recently, and I told the story of in vague detail of that job that you went on a few weeks ago, where the guy had a screwdriver and he had shot and stabbed his girlfriend or wife.
I believe wife. Yeah.
And yeah, and just, how intense that was and stuff. That's
Yeah.
kind
Yeah.
of talking about that. Then some people were like, oh, it'd be cool if you had him on. But yeah, does that training, mental health training, like, I mean, I'm assuming that would help kind of in every job, because you're always going to be dealing with like traumatized people and stuff.
It always does, but I would actually say the one job that you just mentioned is one of the ones where it doesn't, because at that point it goes from a domestic. Really, it started as a domestic, right? It's a wife and husband and a wife situation. Um,
Hmm.
and then it evolved into an assault, and then it evolved into technically a hostage situation. So there's
Mm,
no once you've got an armed suspect that has a possible hostage, it's no longer negotiation. Now it's save the hostage, uh,
hmm
and so the EDP tactics that you learn are a little less important because now you go more to the tactical side, and I've talked about that. It's now it's save the hostage, and hopefully the suspect is not armed when we have to come in there. That's the whole idea,
hmm
something like that.
mm,
But pretty much every other job, you can go to a vehicle accident where someone's a little disoriented, right? Your EMT kicks in, but then also not necessarily EDP training, but your ability to talk to people, to find out if they're okay and to calm them down, all of that stuff. Absolutely. Any kind of training you can get to talk to people is tremendous. I think incredibly valuable as a cop.
Yeah, and I think this is something we'll touch on later too, but people who have criticisms of the police and defund the police and all of this stuff, it's like really what you need is maybe more training or more compassion type training and stuff like that. But all
Yeah,
right, so
yeah.
let's move into talking about what actually is domestic violence. Like we heard that term a lot, and let's just break down. So this is from a great little fact sheet from the DOJ, and I'm just going to read it real quick. Domestic violence is abusive behavior in any relationship as defined by law, which is used to gain or maintain power and control, which I think is the key point here. It's a
Mhm.
power play.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to do so much with expressing physical violence or something. It's really just getting power over another person, probably
Mhm.
because the perpetrator feels like they don't have a lot of power in their lives or whatever, and they're just, you know, anyways. Um, Maintaining power and control over a current or former intimate partner or family or household member. Domestic violence may include physical, sexual, emotional, economic, and psychological actions or threats. Abusers may also commit verbal threats, acts of intimidation, property damage, animal cruelty, elder and child abuse, strangulation, and stalking. The trauma and harm caused by domestic violence can be complex. Because these crimes can be multifaceted, complex, and cause devastating pain, a victim centered and trauma informed response to domestic violence is essential. And you and I have talked about that a lot, like that when domestic violence is actually happening, the victim this is like a moment of significant trauma in their life, especially if it's set to such a degree that the cops are being called.
Mhm.
That in and of itself, and the ways in which police can respond to this situation to minimize that trauma as much as possible, because the way that they respond could either amplify it or minimize it. So the person's going to go through the rest of their life with that trauma
Yeah.
buried within themselves. And
Yeah.
in that moment is really the best opportunity to try to minimize that trauma. So, officers need to understand that victims can display a wide variety of reactions. And I thought this was really interesting reading about this, because it's not just when you go on these jobs, the victims look different every time. Um,
Mhm.
and it's not just a woman, cowering and crying in the corner. Sometimes they're lashing out with anger. Sometimes they're maybe even uh, would hit a cop or something, or yell at the cop, because that's a trauma reaction.
Mhm.
um, or
Yeah.
they're expressing their frustration that maybe they feel not enough has happened in the past. Maybe this is your sixth time coming to that house, and they're like, why am I still dealing with this? Like, do something
Mhm.
about this guy. And they're expressing that frustration. They
Yeah.
may have a passivity. They might be quiet. They might be kind of in shock of what's going on. I thought this one was really interesting, that they laugh or joke. Have you experienced that? Like,
Yeah, not like not like belly laughing, but yeah, I have experienced that where they'll say something
like
and at the
nervous
end they,
laughter.
yeah, like nervous laughter. I have seen that. Yeah, absolutely.
Um, and yeah, I thought that was really interesting, because that's a coping mechanism to like, that's just kind of an involuntary, almost trauma response. And so,
Yeah,
as a police officer, to know that and be aware that laughter is an involuntary trauma response.
yeah. You want a story?
Um, sure.
Yeah, so I had a steady partner for a long time, and um, we had gotten a call for a domestic. It just came over with,
Hmm.
you know, it said friend is calling for her friend. No gender, no nothing. It said, uh, caller is calling for friend. They're at this location. They need police. That's it, right? Don't know what the situation is.
Nothing about what kind of job it's going to be.
Nothing, no
Just
weapons,
that
no
the friend
nothing.
is in trouble. Yeah.
Yeah, it may,
Okay.
and that code, well, I won't give the code because it'll give away where I work, but the code for that is very general. It's not a domestic code. Domestics
Right.
have little number code. This came over as very general, but it sounded serious, so we went over. And as we pull up with our car, the door was open, and that's never a good sign because that means something's going on. So we walk up to the door, we look inside, and there is a female with her back to the door, maybe 10 feet inside the apartment with a knife in her hand. And there's another female that's at the far end of the apartment with a male. The female and male at the far end are very calm, and the one at the doorway is kind of laughing, like, but not in a, like I said, not in a belly laugh, but in like almost an hysterical type of laughing. So
Wow.
what do? I pull out my taser because now there's a weapon, and I'm yelling commands at the female with the knife who has her back to me, and she is ignoring all of the commands. Drop the knife. I'm going to tase you if you don't drop the knife. Please drop the knife. I need you to drop the knife. Right? Not listening. So instead of tasing her, I tackled her to the floor. We were able to pin her arms to the ground. My partner and I removed the knife and placed it in a safe position. So now we cuff the female because she's the one that had the knife, right? My partner,
Hmm.
we separate the two people. My partner walks over to the male. The female friend that was in the kitchen walks over to where the female is cuffed now. And well, let me go back. The female is cuffed for safety, not because she's under arrest, because
Right.
she now needs to be checked for more weapons because one weapon equals more weapons in our minds. It's that simple. If you have one, you could have multiple.
Hmm.
So now she gets cuffed so that we can control her and we can now check for weapons. The female in the kitchen walks over to the other female and starts talking to me about it and lets me know that the male was the aggressor. The male is the one she called, and she called that
Hmm.
the male was abusing the female. We were able to calm everybody
Mm.
down. And long story short, the male was the one that got arrested for I think I can't remember. I think it was assault 3. It wasn't for like harassment or anything like that, but I think it was for assault. And she had grabbed the knife in protection. And people would say, look at the situation. I'm The problem with that is I'm showing up to a job that has a knife. And the very
Right.
first rule of everything, right, regardless of what anybody cares to think should happen, is scene control. That scene has to be controlled. You know, EMS, uh, the fire department will not go by protocol. Will not go into a job if there's still a danger. Right. That's why the police are there. That's why you won't send. We'll get into that, but that's why you won't send social workers in first, because a scene needs to be controlled because anything can happen. So once the scene is controlled and we can go through the stories and all that, calm everybody down, then we can figure everything out. But that's one of those situations where um, things eventually panned out and we were able to see who was going, what was going on with everybody. But the initial thing was what looked like the primary aggressor, the person holding the knife, was actually the victim, and she
Yeah,
was,
kind of when you said scene control, it reminds me of like when you take first aid training and they teach you like before, someone may be unconscious on the ground, but the first thing that you have to do is like, is something burning? Like, is there carbon
yeah,
monoxide? Like,
you,
because
you
then
yell out,
anyone else who shows up to respond or any other bystanders, they could also become victims. So, you
yeah,
know, yeah, and if someone has a weapon, even if they're holding the weapon in self-defense because they've been abused,
hmm
or threatened,
Yeah,
Well, they have a weapon and you don't know that. You don't know the
absolutely.
situation.
And
Maybe if they call 911 and explain that to the 911 operator, I
yeah,
don't know, what would happen in that situation. Maybe
maybe
you'd
they're
have
too
a little
traumatized,
bit more
right?
information.
Hmm.
I know that that's been an issue in the past with people. People call 911 and 911 doesn't adequately explain the situation to the police, and there's sort of some confusion. And someone who could be maybe suffering a mental health crisis or something like that, um, they're, the cops don't have the right information to go by, and they could end up like hurting that person,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I
So,
mean, so what
so
911 communicates to you is like pretty important.
absolutely, yeah. And we take that as a grain
Like
of
if
salt
someone
because
calls, yes, you take whatever 911 writes in the thing with a grain of salt, because it also, the person calling could be lying. So even if they
uh,
write in the correct thing or whatever.
yeah, and honestly, like, think about it, right? Most of from what we know, most of our communication is verbal, right? I mean, is visual,
Mhm.
right? So, you have
Yeah.
somebody sitting at a desk who can't see anybody, who's taking information, doing the best that they
Right.
can. But how much
Yes.
information, even if it's done effectively, how much information is really
Right.
relayed about the situation to the officers that might be helpful? So we take it as a grain of salt. We show up, and then as quickly as
You
we
have to
can.
assess it.
That's it. Yeah, one of those type of
Yeah,
situations.
that's interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's literally a game of telephone, right? Because
Mhm.
someone is calling 911, they're saying they may be hysterical, or they may be, um, hang up really quick, or like the call is really quick. And then so the 911 operator has to sort of do the best they can to um, get that information to you. But really, it's up to you when you arrive on the scene to assess what's going on.
Yeah, and one
So,
thing I will note, is
yeah.
that, like, so with the story that I told, right? If that woman had just dropped the knife, right, there wouldn't have been
Hmm.
any need for me escalating my voice or taking out a taser,
Right.
anything like. But at the
Or
same time,
tackling her.
exactly. But at the same time, I can't blame her for that because she was in the middle of her trauma. She was still in it. I mean, she probably
Exactly. It,
didn't even see straight. And so I can't blame them for that. But
right.
but what people have to understand is the reality is, regardless of the trauma that's going on, my first rule that
Hmm.
will never change about policing is scene control. Until that scene is
Right.
controlled, I don't care. I literally don't care what your trauma is, right? And that might sound like a little bit weird, and maybe people don't take that correctly, but my first goal as a police officer is scene control. Once that scene is controlled, then I can sit you down, I can separate two people, and I can find out the full story. And then I can either console or bring in somebody that can console or talk to them. But absolute number one rule is scene control, because as we'll get into, is every house has knives in the kitchen. Every
Yeah.
every apartment is a new layout that I don't know, but that the people there know, right? And they could be hot. Somebody could be
Right.
hiding it. So scene
Right.
control is absolutely the most. I don't care about your trauma when I show up. What I care about is scene control. And then after that,
Hmm.
I will then switch. I'll put my new hat on, social worker hat, and then I will care about your trauma. Until then, unless
Hmm.
you're an aide, unless you're like actually physically injured, um, scene control is the most important thing, and that won't
Yeah, and
change.
I think what you said about that that woman didn't respond to you because she was in the midst of this
Yeah,
trauma,
still
and
in
I
it.
think that there's a lot
Mhm.
to that. And I do think I agree, it makes a lot of sense what you're saying. Um, but that could be an area where more training about what a trauma response looks like. And that
Mhm.
was the point of, this stuff is this worksheet or whatever was to actually, it was directed at police to educate them about different ways that a victim can look, and then it's not always going to look the same as sometimes it will be a person holding a knife and they're the ones who are the victim, and they're not responding to the order or whatever because they're in this trauma mode. And so
Mhm.
like I said, it makes a lot of sense what you're saying, because you don't know that showing up. You
Yeah.
don't even know who called. Maybe it was
Flip
one
the
of the
script.
other people and this woman was the aggressor, and you don't
You
know
did.
that. And especially when there's a weapon involved, anybody could get hurt. The cops, the people in the room, somebody else who shows up, it's so you have to neutralize that danger and then go from there.
Absolutely. Because if you flip the script,
And
right,
I
how
mean,
easily could that same story be that she is the primary aggressor with a knife? It's I've been to those jobs, right? She found out
mhm.
her boyfriend cheated and grabs a knife and is like, ready to end things. Um, could just be very, and I know the statistics you'll say is, women are 75%, the victims and all that stuff. That's fine. But I've showed up to jobs where the female is absolutely the primary aggressor. And there's witnesses there that will back that up. So that same
But
story.
you and I did talk about that, like, your bias, if you don't know, is that the woman is the victim, because it is just so much more common.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So if you walk into a situation you don't know, it's like you would be, I mean, that's kind of makes, but that's also
Yeah.
been your experience. Like what would
Yeah.
you say on domestic violence jobs you've gone on? Like what percentage from your experience, like, has the woman been the aggressor?
I mean,
It's got to
almost.
be pretty low.
Yeah, it's
Almost
like
none.
the aggressor. Yeah, almost none. It's almost always. And we never
Sometimes
find
it's
out.
like two women fighting with each other or something like that.
Yeah,
That's
and
different. But
and
a
what I
woman being aggressive towards a man.
yeah, it's usually very low. And what I would say now, having told that story, is somebody's holding a knife and they're ignoring orders. I have every protocol in the world to light them up with that taser. So maybe I didn't, now that I think about it, maybe I didn't light her up with that taser because I may have felt that she was maybe the victim. I don't know. But,
Mhm.
if I would have tased her in that situation, right? She gets tased, she gets sent to the hospital to get the prongs out. And, we do a report, small report for it. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm allowed in that situation where somebody is ignoring an order to tase them. And I didn't. So I maybe wonder if
Yeah, I
that's
mean, better that you didn't, because just like what we were talking about earlier, that this being a moment of trauma, like, just like magnifying that so much by getting tased when you didn't deserve it, like,
absolutely, yeah,
But so I want to talk about some of the different manifestations of domestic violence, that not all of these are like technically crimes, but I think domestic violence as a whole, even when there's not physical abuse, I mean, even without physical abuse, there's still a lot of things that do fall within, um, being illegal, like
hmm
economic manipulation and stuff like that. Obviously, drugging somebody that are not like necessarily like per se illegal, but yeah, it can take a lot of different forms. That's the point. And I think if you have a relationship and experience any one of these things, that is a red flag to get out as soon as you can, because if one
yeah,
little thing is happening, to not make an excuse for it, which I think a
yeah.
lot of people do.
Well, so
So,
what I would say to that is that's an interesting point. Um, so you have to make the differentiation between, right, what is domestic abuse, right, which is what I think this slide shows, and what is
mhm.
a domestic violence job for a police officer. So, um, you know, deserting, insulting, intimidation. Those are not things you would even call the police for. I hate to say it, but
Right.
the police, whether you like it or not, the police have a very specific function, and it's to deal with violations, misdemeanors, and
Hmm.
felonies. That's it. I don't deal with anything else. So, although I agree that deserting, insulting, and intimidation are domestic abuse, I'm not coming to those jobs to solve that problem. That is not a police
Right. I
problem.
think the takeaway from this is to sort of realize that it can take these sort of kind of more subtle, insidious forms. And maybe that's all it ever is, and in
Hmm.
which case you should still get out anyways. But it can
Absolutely.
start with that and snowball
Yeah.
to something that the cops end up responding to.
Absolutely.
And they're red flags, and there's really no reason to be in an abusive relationship. And, sometimes even just, what I advocate for, which is this women not getting into relationships with men at all, because I just think it's so dangerous. Because also, even once you find one of these like tiny little red flags, right? That may be
Hmm.
too late at that point. Already become involved with this person. Now they're
Hmm.
showing you who they are. It's
Yep. Depending
very
on.
hard to escape. We talked
Hmm.
about that in the last stream of asking a woman, why didn't you leave? Because it becomes next to impossible for a
Yeah.
lot of different, that's a complex topic, kind of
Yeah.
outside the scope of this
I've seen.
conversation. But
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think you've seen that, right? People, even when
Yeah.
the cops are called and the woman has the chance, maybe the opportunity to get away, and she stays, and then you end up going there again.
Yeah, you and I have talked about this, and I'm going to try to use the right word because of the audience, but um, cops in general, right? We expect that the female domestic abused person will drop the charges after we've done everything that we could, showed up, tried to handle
Mhm.
everything to the best of our ability, collected as much of the evidence that we could, did the reports, and then talked to the district attorney to draw up any possible charges. We will find out, like the next day or whatever down the line, that the victim is refusing to press charges, has pulled back. Initially tried to press charges with us. We did all the paperwork for that, and then is pulling the charges back. It's almost something that we expect, and that's kind of out of our hands in that situation. It's the process. You and I have talked about this. The process is, we go there, we deal with the scene, we collect the evidence, we bring it to the district attorney to write up the charges. The district attorney will talk
Mhm.
directly to the victim and basically take it from there. If they need anything from us, pictures, photos, any type of discovery, um, we'll give it to them. But then the district attorney takes it from there. And a lot of times we get notices that, charges have been dropped. You don't have to go to court. There's no court date. And we'll be back there. And it's a sad situation because, nobody should have to deal with domestic violence. And, we've talked about the multitude of reasons why people get caught up in domestic violence and feel like they can't get out. Um, but
Is that frustrating? Like feeling like you did all the work and you kind of handed them, this case on a platter or whatever, and
it
then the
is.
victim
Yeah.
herself is like, actually, no. But then it happens all over again. And like
You know
I
what it
could
is?
see how you would maybe feel jaded after a while dealing with it.
Yeah, I think for me personally, I can't speak for any of the cops, but for me personally, I find it sad. Some of the
Mhm.
most rewarding jobs, I'll say it this way, some of the most rewarding jobs that I went to as as a patrol officer were domestics, because you can see it in their faces, whether people like to admit it or not. When a cop shows up, in my opinion, I can see it in their eyes. If they're actually being abused, there's a relief. There's a thank God somebody's here, and it may be momentarily, it may be just for the hour that you're there dealing with it, but for that moment, that person, the male, we'll call it the male across the room, that's either physically abusing or mentally abusing, they get shut down for at least an hour. And if they get arrested, then
Mhm.
it's for the rest of the night. You can see the relief. So for me, it's
Yeah.
sad when everything goes through, and I'll talk about what I think is the main reason is just like living quarters and money, right? The uh, what I think, not based on any statistics, but what I think is, I think they can't get out of the apartment. They have nowhere to live. They may be dependent on them for money, um, and they don't get out. And it's
Right.
understandable that that's a tough situation, but that's probably the saddest part to me. Not necessarily frustrating. I'm sure cops get frustrated with that, but for me, it's a sad picture to see that time and time again.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit in a little bit about why women don't call the police.
Mhm.
um, and one of the reasons they don't call is because they're afraid of something happening to the abuser, like afraid of them getting arrested or whatever. Are there
Mhm.
situations, I don't know this like legally, where this the state or presses charges, like it's not up to the victim, like it
Yes.
crosses a line or something where it's not up to the victim anymore to drop the charges, it's just going to go whether they want it to or not.
Yeah, from what I
You know what I'm
understand,
saying?
it's specifically physical abuse. If the evidence is the evidence, and this is something that I think is dependent on the district attorney. What I see is most of the time the assistant district attorneys who draw up the cases will go to their
Hmm.
boss, which is either the DA or some sort of supervisor, um, and they'll say, "Hey, listen, I got this case. It's domestic abuse. These are the pictures of the physical abuse." Um, and then they'll say, "Yeah, I don't need the victim to testify. The state is gonna or the city is going to prosecute on behalf of the victim." Yeah, that absolutely happens.
Yeah. All right. So the deadliest jobs that cops go on are domestic violence jobs.
Mhm.
41% of the times when police are killed on the job are responding to domestic violence jobs.
Yeah.
Um, in almost every case, there's a gun involved, or a gun is used to kill the police officer.
Mhm.
This is interesting. In 35% of those cases, there was only one officer responding. So that was something I wanted to ask you. When you were on patrol, you always had a partner, right?
Yeah.
Virtually.
Mhm.
Yeah. And if you know it's a domestic violence case where like actual like hitting and whatever, or if there's a weapon, it's definitely more than two cops go, right? If they can, or what was the protocol for that, for how many would respond? I think this is really interesting, and I think it's more in like rural areas where cops go out by themselves, or maybe like state police and stuff where they're out by
Yeah.
themselves.
Mhm. Yeah, a lot of times, state police will back up smaller like counties or towns that don't have their own police force or have, some police
Yeah.
forces don't have police overnight, right? So the state troopers will back that up. So
Hmm.
yeah, they'll go out by themselves. They respond by themselves to domestics, and if the situation looks a little scary, they'll call for backup. But I mean, I've heard plenty of stories where their backup is minutes, if not, like 20, 30, 40 minutes away, 55 miles away. Is I just heard a recent story where the state trooper called for backup, and their backup was literally 55 miles away. So kind of crazy. Um, yeah, so I'll say um, the protocol for where I work is not necessarily that they'll back up, but people will do that because they understand domestics are specifically dangerous. So another
Hmm.
car will say, "Okay, I'm going to go back that unit." They show up together. They go in as 2 or 4 officers, and once they're able to control the scene, then they can get the go ahead to go back on patrol and deal with whatever else they need to. I mean, I could tell story after story after story where we've heard screaming over the radio where it's a domestic, and the 2 officers are literally getting beat up over at that situation. Now you've got 5, 6 cars racing over to that location to control things. So yeah, domestics are no joke when they come over. So most of the time, the another unit will just put it upon themselves to say, "Hey, Central, I'm gonna go back that up."
Yeah, one question I wanted to ask you is, both on patrol and now as a SWAT rescue officer, what were the most common jobs, in a typical, like as a patrol, how many jobs in a typical day would you go to? So a job being a 911 call.
Yeah, so I would say in the area that I worked was pretty busy. We would get usually I'd say between 15 to 20 jobs a night, most of
Hmm.
which would
And
be
okay.
yeah. So most of would be like unknown jobs. So it's like a job where it's a call for help, no information given, um, and then you need to go over and you'll do try the call back, right, to see if you can get that person on the phone again. If it's if it's linked to a location, you'll try to do some looking around that location. Most of the jobs, like the majority, are just these unknown jobs where you're showing up to an unknown situation. You have no idea what's going on. I think domestics
So
would
they're like
be.
prank calls.
You know what? So I think sadly what happens is there's these repeaters on the phone lines. So
Mm-hmm.
someone, yes, some will be prank calls, but some will be like actual situations where somebody's frantic, calls and then puts over very little information and hangs up, and then they won't give a
Mm,
location. And the last thing that we have is where that phone call bounced off one of those repeaters. So we call it an Annie Alley location. So Central will say, Annie Alley location is 21 Wallaby Way. So you head over to that location and you try to call back if you can. Usually it never calls
mm-hmm.
back. You don't get a person. And then you look around and you do the best you can. And then if there seems to be nothing going on, you mark it. You mark the job and
Mm-hmm.
go back on. But yeah, I'd say the secondary would be domestics. Absolutely.
So
It's
it's very
it's
common.
very common. Yeah.
So, like it's something you're dealing with almost on a daily basis.
Yeah, and they're split between domestic calls, which are just
Mm-hmm.
it could range from I want somebody out of my apartment, right, to I just got beat up by somebody or I'm assaulted by somebody, to I have an order of protection in place and they just showed up and I want them arrested. So it's the gamut with that.
Mm-hmm. And how about what types of jobs and how many jobs do you go on now as a SWAT rescue officer?
I would say they're reduced dramatically because we only go to things that patrol is not necessarily allowed to handle. It's past their scope. So
Mm-hmm.
I'd say three. Busy days could be as much as like 6, 7 jobs, possibly. Slower days could be
But
0.
you
I've
also
had
have days where you don't do any jobs. Yeah.
absolutely, yeah.
You
I
just
mean, there's
sit
been
there.
weeks. Yeah, I've had like a week and a half where there's no jobs because we only deal with the extreme things. The barricaded suspects and the
Right.
barricaded perps or cars that flip
Building
over,
collapse.
building collapses, somebody trying to jump off a bridge or off a building, commit suicide, things like that. So, yeah, dramatically reduced. So it could be between 0 and I think the most I've ever done, if I can remember, is like about 8. Couple
And then
serious, couple.
what's like the most common? Do you have any do you go to domestic violence? Well, you obviously did like a couple weeks ago. So you go when it escalates past the point where police can deal with it.
So I'm going to say it this way: where I patrol or where I'm an officer now, the unit that I'm in the location that I am responsible for. Most of our
Mhm.
calls are barricaded, emotionally disturbed people.
Yeah, that's your most common.
That's right now. And
So
if you were
someone's called 911 and they're frantic and then the cops show up and they won't let them in, or one of their relatives or something like that or friends has called and said my friend is saying they're suicidal or something like that. And then the
exact
cops show up and they can't get in the house and then they call you.
Yeah, and when it comes to emotionally disturbed people, I'm going to say it this way: you're allowed to be. I know this is not a PC term, but you're allowed to be crazy in your own apartment. It's not something that
Mhm.
is against the law. Where we worry is if people aren't taking their medication and acting abnormal or not eating, not their
Okay.
hygiene is dropped, the place is erratic. If there's a lot of these. I
They're
don't
in
know what they're called.
danger or they're a danger to themselves, a danger to somebody else.
Exactly. That's when we'll step in and we'll enact the mental hygiene warrant to make sure that they're all right. They won't be under arrest, but we'll have to go in and make sure that they're okay. Yeah, that's the majority
Mhm.
of what we do.
Okay. I feel like we somewhat covered this. Anything you have to say? What makes domestic violence jobs uniquely dangerous?
Um,
Like, why are cops getting killed on DV jobs and not other types of jobs? Like,
well, so I think I'll keep it quick, but basically, emotions are always high at these places. You're never showing up and they're like, yeah, she didn't cook the chicken right, so I got mad and I mean, it could be anything. It's usually like these blowout fights, furniture's destroyed, regardless of who broke it, and they're like tons of yelling at these things. So you're showing up to these situations that are completely out of control. You're as an
Mm-hmm.
officer, you're worried about your own safety. You're worried about the safety of the people there. You're trying to de-escalate an absolutely ridiculous situation. You're trying to separate two people who just want to continue yelling at each other. Um, and then you have to worry about weapons. There's always knives in the kitchen. There's always some sort of weapon at the house. We never walk into a domestic thinking there's no weapons. And then on top of
Mm,
that, um, the people there know the layout. I don't know the layout of your apartment. I don't know how many people.
mm,
So imagine trying to tackle a domestic situation where you've got we'll call it generic, a husband and wife fighting, right? Um,
mm-hmm.
at what point in time do I check the rest of the apartment? Do I believe the people, the
Mm,
victim or the suspect there, um, and that there's nobody else in the apartment, right? At what point do I check? At
right.
what point do I ask? These are all things that need to be taken into consideration. So there's
Mm-hmm.
so many different variables, and you never walk into something that's ever like starting at zero. It's always walking into something that's
Mm,
at 90, and
mm-hmm.
that's very dangerous because there's a lot of things that you need to think about and make sure that is, people aren't going to jump out at you. Why is this guy sitting in the kitchen and not coming out to talk to me, right? Because there's
Mm,
knives in the kitchen. Does he have anything in his hands? Does she have anything in her hands? Are there children in the apartment? All this stuff
mm-hmm.
is like, you know, rapid fire questions that you're trying to ask while trying to de-escalate, while
Mm-hmm.
trying to speak over the radio. It's a lot. It's definitely a lot.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that's why I would say they're uniquely dangerous. Is it's home court advantage for the people that live there, and you have no idea what's in there, or what people are capable of, or even why you think that or why they think that you're there. Right? Somebody could have a warrant, and you show up, and they in their mind are thinking you're there to arrest them for the warrant, and you're not there at all for them. Right? And now you've got
Right.
a sketchy little situation for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Do you have like techniques that you use to diffuse a situation?
Yeah, I think the most helpful is to split people up, different rooms. If you have
Mm-hmm.
two, I mean, it's a lot tougher when you have one officer there. I've never had to deal with being a single officer at a location, but um, yeah, separating them so that because you don't need to go through statistics, but we'll say generically, right? The female is the victim, right? Um, she's not going to talk to you about anything in front of him. She's not going to tell you what's going on. She's not going to tell you what she wants out of the situation. She is not going to reveal anything to you in front of him because he is the problem, right? So you have to split them up, right? And then she knows he's looking, right? Even if you pull her to a different room, he's listening and probably walking back and forth, trying to get some information on what she's about to tell you. She may not even feel comfortable telling you um, if he's at that location. So uh, I think splitting people up is the
Yeah.
most effective thing.
I think we're going to talk about this in a little bit too. But one reason why women don't call, I think, I haven't been in this particular situation, but I would imagine that the fear of retaliation or retribution or something from the abuser, like, oh, you called the cops, now you're really going to get it.
Yeah,
You know what I
absolutely.
mean? Like,
Hmm.
I don't know. It just came to my mind. All right, so I want to talk briefly about this idea of mutual abuse,
Hmm.
which is um, a myth. It's considered to be a myth. Sometimes you show up to a situation and both parties have evidence that they've been hitting each other, or like they both have injuries. And really, psychologists and things say that there's no such thing actually as mutual abuse. There's always an aggressor and always a victim, and that what might look like abuse or a toxic relationship going both ways is really a person defending themselves, or like I have an example here. So, for an example, During an argument, your partner blocks a doorway, preventing you from leaving the room. You shove them out of the way, and your partner responds by hitting you. They later claim that you started it by shoving them first. So it's very a manipulation tactic that abusers use, is making it look like they're actually the victim. So I
Yeah.
think maybe a question for you would be, in fact, I have a question related to this. So this came from a subscriber. I've heard the claim that in most cases, DV is not one-sided and both parties are violent towards each other. Personally, I'm a bit skeptical about it, since in a het couple, even if they are both violent, that's heterosexual, I'm assuming you know that,
Mhm.
the woman most likely suffers much more physical damage. Also, what part does self-defense play in this? I would be curious to hear your view on it, and I hope it made sense. So is it always clear who, you told me a story one time and I don't think you remember, but and it might have been that story you told earlier. I remember it a little differently in my mind, but you know,
Mhm.
these situations where you show up and the woman is like hysterical, probably was that situation actually, um and the guy is there and he's like, I think a couple people brought up Gabby Petito, and you and I have talked about that a bit because you watched that body cam footage and stuff of when
Yeah.
they were stopped by police a few days before he ended up killing her.
Mhm.
And what I've read is those cops in, I think it was in Utah, really regret how they handled it and felt that if they could go back, they would have handled it differently.
Mhm.
Um, but they did, like you said, split them up. But then she's hysterical and he's kind of making her out to be like she's, the perpetrator of this craziness, and he's like joking with the cops and stuff.
Mhm.
And it could be the abuser who's, I feel like as a cop you would know that if you come to the situation that's so heated or whatever, and then one person is like suddenly they're like very casual and joking with you, that's not really like victim behavior, like, am I right about that?
I don't know. I mean, that's a tough one. Listen, I mean, you're getting, we're gonna, you're delving into an interesting situation, right? So, um, cops are not social workers. They're not psychologists, right? Um,
Right.
they don't have that type of training, nor am I like even equipped in this job to make those type of decisions, right? You and I have talked before. Literally, my main focus is to find out what the allegations are, right? I look around. I try to gather. Um, I try to gather as much information and evidence as I can to, if there's going to be a case, in order to get it to the district attorney so that they can prosecute the case properly. But at the end of the day, and I don't know what to tell people about this, but if two people make claims that fit a crime, they're both getting arrested. It doesn't matter how I feel about, it kind of take your emotions out of it. And if you take Gabby and her boyfriend, for example, she's sitting there
Hmm.
hysterical and she's like, he hits me, right? And then the cop walks over to him, and now the other cop walks over to him and talks to him, and he says something like, well, she hit me first. Well, now you've got, cross complainant domestic violence that both people could be arrested. And then you talk to them and you're like, listen, he's claiming that you hit her, she's claiming that that she hit you or whatever. And um, at the end of the day, you guys are both going to get arrested. And people will take that as a threat, but it's not up to the police officer to decide necessarily who, you know what actually happened, because unless there's video evidence of it, we would never know. People can lie all they want. The
So
job of
it's
the
someone
cop.
above you who has to make that decision about what really happened. Would that be like the DA
Yeah,
or
that's
what?
that's the DA.
Yeah.
And I don't know if
So
people
that's
really
above
fully
your,
understand that.
yeah. So this is something you and I talked about. We had a long conversation yesterday prepping this stream, but
Mhm.
the idea of discretion and like how much discretion you have in whether or not to arrest somebody. First of all, you don't even make arrests now in your job now, but when you
Now,
didn't
no,
like
that's
doing it.
yeah, yeah, it wasn't my favorite.
You would really only arrest somebody if you really had to, right?
Yeah,
But there are
there's
certain
some.
situations, because it's
Sorry, yeah.
annoying, because you
Mhm.
have to do a lot of paperwork and you have to work overtime and all this kind of stuff.
Can I
But
tell you, Steven?
there are
Oh
some
my God.
situations where you don't have the discretion to like let it go. You have to arrest the person.
Yeah. Can I tell you how many times uh, that I've not only seen it from other officers who have been processing arrests at the precinct, but also from myself, where um, in the precinct that I worked in, the male and female holding cells were facing each other, right? How many times were
Wow.
there
That's
cross
super
complainants?
weird.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But that's what they do. It's one big room, and then the holding cell on either side is one's male, one's female, and there's cameras in there so that the people that are inside the station house can watch them pretty closely. But how many times there's
But
been
still,
cross
so you
complaining?
could, yeah. And they're at the station in cells right across from each other. That's
Yeah, yeah.
super wild.
Not appropriate, right? But how many times that's happened, right? Where and listen, if it that's when you get cross complainants like that, where both people are getting arrested, I'm going to say it very very plainly, that it's not that I walked in and there's this like uh, incredibly beaten woman on the floor, right? And then the man standing there going, "Yeah, she hit me too," and then we arrest both people. I want people to understand it's not necessarily just like some random claim. We get to use our brains in situations and see
Hmm.
what's going on. You don't have like some beaten woman on the floor with blood coming out of her nose. And then the guy just gets to say, "Oh well, she hit me too." No, that we primary aggressor is primary aggressor, and if we can pick that out, the primary aggressor, we will.
Hmm.
And then that person will
Yeah.
only get arrested. But if it's like, he's got a scratch on his neck and, she has a red face or something like that, yeah, I'm sorry, but they're both getting arrested and they can both go tell their story to the district attorney. And the district attorney will, to the best of their ability, try to figure out the situation. But what I was going to say before is there's been many situations where, we're calling down to the district attorney to process everything. And she'll say, well, we talked to the victim. We talked to the well, they're both suspects and both victims at that point. We talked to both of them, and
Yeah.
they want to drop the charges, and they never even go
Hmm.
that far. We don't even send them
Yeah.
down to where the court system is. They just drop the charges on the spot as cross complainants. So you want to talk about like a little bit of a flawed system. That that's it.
Yeah.
And I'm
I just
definitely
want
not
to,
one to sit there. Sorry,
yeah.
I'm
No.
not one
Okay. So I
to.
just wanted to
Yeah.
go ahead.
A little bit of delay there. I'll say it real quick. I'm not one to sit here and fully defend. Like my job is not to fully defend the police departments and how they work. And I think there can be
Right.
tremendous amount of changes and I think from what I've seen in the last 9 years, I think there has been tremendous changes um, in a good direction. So I think
Yes,
no one should
definitely.
be. Yeah.
Like, I think that there has been a lot more, man, I don't have any stats for this, but because I don't like to like state something as a fact when I don't have a
Mhm.
statistic to back it up. But like, there's a lot more awareness of domestic violence and sexual assault, sexual harassment, stuff like that. It's hard to imagine that any police department doesn't have policies about that at this
Yeah.
point. I mean,
Mhm.
even the cops are not known to be the most wokest like aspect of society, but I feel
Mhm.
like that has filtered down to, that awareness must have.
Yeah. Well, I will
Yeah,
say
I
that
want
the
to point out.
cameras
Oh, yeah,
have done a
go ahead.
great job. The cameras have done a great job of taking
Oh, body
um,
cams.
yeah, body cameras have taken a lot of the decision making out of the police officers' hands. There's something that's recorded on
Hmm.
video camera. That's it, and
Yeah,
there's no choices to be
I
made at
think
that
that
point.
body cams are a very powerful tool for everybody. Like, it adds so much accountability. I want to point out this comment from Beatrix, who says, in Manitoba, they changed the law so that if someone has clearly assaulted the other, the police will press charges on behalf of the province and arrest the aggressor, usually the guy. And we did talk about that a little bit earlier in the stream,
Yeah.
when if it's a significant enough, then the victim can't just drop the charges. The government will take over and pursue the case on their behalf.
Yeah, and the one thing I would clarify is she said the police will do it. It's not the police. It's going to be the assistant district attorney. It's going to be the legal system that are going to be picking up those charges and pressing them on somebody.
Right.
Just a
Yeah,
small
exactly.
differentiation. Yeah.
Yes, because, and again, we talked about this earlier about the police being like the tip of the iceberg of this much bigger system, but the police are who civilians have the most interaction with. So they don't see that, like, problems with the police are really maybe manifestations of problems with things much greater than the police, but that's what they have the firsthand
Yeah.
experience with. And I want to point out this comment too, that Fly Amanita says, the PD by me had a night where they went over DV homicide information. It was horrifying. A lot of DV cases never have charges pressed.
Yeah,
And
that's
Ice
sad.
Goddess says, these stories make me so glad I'm a female suffragist. And I always say this on my channel, but like, it's not victim blaming, but you literally can't be a victim of intimate partner violence if you don't have an intimate partner. It's just like a fact. So the most danger to a woman, I think Mariana said it earlier, is living with a man. That's like the most dangerous situation a woman can put herself
Yeah.
in. Really, actually, is, did you know? I'm just going to ask you, did you know that what the number one cause of death in pregnant women is? What causes the most death in pregnant women?
I'm gonna draw at a straw here, take a little stab at it, and say domestic violence.
Yes, that's the number one cause of death. Not
Complete guess.
eclampsia, not diabetes, not any of these things that can go wrong actually with the
Yeah,
pregnancy, a hemorrhage or something. It is actually being killed by your partner.
that's
So I just find that
insane.
statistic
Yeah,
so
that's crazy.
wild. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me say one
And
thing.
yeah, go ahead. Sure.
Just real quick. I want to make it clear because I know who your audience is. The point of me being here is specifically just insight into how some of the systems work. My
Yeah.
procedure, patrol guide, things like that. I am not at all interested in defending all cops or the police
Oh,
system
sure.
as a whole, or men in general. That's my
Yes.
goal. My goal is not any of that, other than if people have questions or
I wouldn't have you on if that was what you were interested in. Of
yeah,
course. Yes. It's just, yeah, I see the point of this is that you bring a different perspective because you have firsthand experience with, not, a lot of us have. I have been in an abusive relationship, not physically, thankfully, I guess, but I've been stalked and stuff like that. And but I'm just one person and those are just my one experience. But as a police officer, you've seen this, you see patterns, you've seen this happen to hundreds of women.
yeah,
So you bring a perspective that really none of us here have, because even though a lot of us have experienced abuse or domestic violence or what have you, we've just had our one experience of it. And we definitely listen to other women. That's another thing I want to say, like, any woman who has had these experiences who wants to talk about it is welcome to come on the channel. I'm not quote unquote platforming you at the expense of that or something. And yeah, and I think it's interesting what you say, like, you're not here to, you're not a rah like I bleed blue type person anyways. Like,
definitely not.
you're critical of certain things and think that certain things could be done better. So
Yeah. I try to
you
keep the
know
rationale and sanity in the foremost part of my discussions. I've always felt that the truth always lies somewhere in the middle of whatever the two discussions are. So I try to live that way, where it's, there, if you're on one side and the other side is very bad, you probably got some stuff wrong in there. The truth is in the
Yeah.
middle. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that you are very persuaded by facts and statistics and evidence in sort of the same way that I am. I wanted to also mention Beatrix's comment about many cases being mutual violence, and we talked about that already, but just want to let you know if you're interested in hearing about that. Earlier in the
Mhm.
stream, we did talk about that. She also has a question. Do you have many known offenders that police are used to seeing? That's common where she lives. You're in sort of a larger area, so
Yeah,
maybe,
absolutely.
but
Um, yeah. So what I can talk to is there's a specifically where I've worked, there's a domestic violence unit, specifically officers that only deal with domestic violence. They do domestic
okay.
violence checkups. So if somebody is a victim of domestic
Oh,
violence, they will go out weekly, if not daily, and um, do checkups on these people, see how things are going, where they're at, if they've
mm-hmm,
seen the perpetrator back in there, if they need, and those are the people, the domestic violence officers, usually female officers, will be able to dispense resources to a victim for help to either get relocated for an apartment or, um, you know, I know different resources that they could possibly have. Um, there is absolutely lists of domestic. There's a top 5 in the precinct, top 10. They'll have their charts of they know these people very well by first name basis. Um,
mm-hmm,
uh, the detective squad will have a similar list, but it'll be for suspects of like violent crimes and things like that. And we have multiple bulletin boards of every police station will have that, multiple bulletin boards of outstanding warrants, of wanted people, of domestic abusers. And yes,
mm-hmm,
specifically where I've worked, they've done their best to revamp and make sure they stay on top of that. Um, they give them
mm-hmm,
their work phone numbers. If anything happens, call me directly and I'll shoot over. These are the days that I work. If I'm not in, this is my partner. My partner will shoot over as quick as they can. If you see that person, if they're getting heated, if they're starting to break things, if they put their hands on you, give us a call and we'll rush over there. Those are the type of change they've made where I work anyway.
yeah, and I think that you and I talked about this too, is because the police are like one of the only interactions people like even have with the government, and some of these people really are in need of resources, being
Uh-huh.
using the cops as a bridge to social services, for example, or having the cops educated in who they can direct these victims to
Mhm.
where they could get more social services, and like I've said, in an ideal situation, these people would just be like inundated with people who want to help them. And, if we had the resources to do that, that would really be optimal. And that would probably give women the best chance to like get out of these situations. Cause like you said earlier, one reason they stay is they're financially attached to these guys. Like rent
Yeah.
is expensive, and
Mhm.
they may be relying on them to pay the bills
Or
and stuff.
yeah, or a child is involved, right? Or you
Mhm.
know, just yeah, an immense number of things that would keep them connected to this person. And aside from what we would know is probably there, which is the verbal abuse, right, and the manipulation
Uh-huh.
and all that stuff. Aside from that, just the physical barriers of trying to find your own place, trying to have your own bank account. There's been plenty of
Mhm.
situations where they don't even have their own bank account. And it has nothing to do with the police, but that's definitely a domestic violence control that a lot of men will say will have over women. So yeah, very tough to get out of that.
Right.
And I know that the government spends millions, if not billions, on social services. So um, they're out there. It's just tough.
Right.
It's tough for people sometimes. It's not always easy to say, yeah, just get another apartment. Call this number, get another apartment. You're starting your life over. You don't want to believe that the person you believe that the person wants to change you. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that. It's kind of a sad
Mhm.
situation.
Yeah, this person says the PD by me has a volunteer position for victim advocate where you can get trained to help give victims information and connections on programs to help.
I love it. Yep.
Um,
Perfect.
yeah. Um, and let's see. Beatrix has another question. There's a massive overlap between crime and mental health, and how does the police department deal with it? Or is it the police department's job to deal with it? Or I
That's a
mean,
great
definitely,
question.
like you said, one of the most common jobs you see is someone having a mental health crisis.
Yeah, yeah.
And so a lot of police resources are already going to that.
I gotta be honest, I don't think they've figured that one out yet. When it comes to crime being
Mhm.
committed because of mental illness, you know, there's tons of we have the recidivist lists at the precinct, and you know
Yeah.
how many times like a Walmart is, you know, petty larceny at a Walmart comes over, or that's not a Walmart, a Walgreens, or you know, some type of CVS is being, you know, somebody's taking small items and running out. Uh, I don't
Right.
think they really have an answer for that. You know, when it comes to it, it's you know, you got to look at it one of two ways, right? It's they're having a mental health crisis, but they've committed a crime. So the
Mhm.
call that comes over is, hey, someone is stealing a material possession, and we need the police here because we don't want that material possession, you know, to go with somebody who's not going to pay for it, right? So we show up, and
Right.
if they've committed a crime, they get arrested. It's just that simple. Um, if they're having a mental health crisis and it's blatant, and EMS is on scene and they could say, yeah, this person needs like an evaluation, we're going to take them for evaluation, then you don't charge a crime to someone who is going to get evaluated. Um,
Mm.
so we can split those, but a lot of times, like homelessness, you know, connected to mental health,
Yeah.
illness, if
It's
they're
almost like,
stealing,
the government needs to kind of go to the root of those problems. Like, the person is committing a crime because they're homeless or they're mentally ill or they're addicted to drugs or something. It's not really like a police issue at that point. It's really
yeah,
like, well, we need to what are the solutions that we get people housed? Can we get them
yeah,
mental health treatment? Um, and that
that's a
can be
tough one.
really difficult too because
Yeah,
some people who they've been given treatment and they stop taking their medication and they would rather be on the streets. Like, that actually does happen. It's just, like, super
yeah, yeah,
unfortunate. Like, even when the resources are available and how to get someone to take advantage of the resources. Like, I
yeah,
live in Connecticut. It's like a very rich state. I was on Medicaid for a few years because I had a serious illness. And once you're on Medicaid, like, the world of resources opens up to you. You can get
mhm,
everything for free, basically, in Connecticut, because
yeah,
it's not all states are like that. Some states are super poor,
yeah,
but there are people still who have all of that available to them, and they'll still be homeless.
that's so sad.
Because why? And they may have even someone has reached out to them, and
Yeah.
so, yeah. Um,
So to go
Another
back to
quick
her
question.
question, no,
Okay.
sorry, just to glaze over it real quick. I honestly don't
Yeah.
think there's a good system in place. I personally see a huge revolving door for crime committed by mental health
Mhm.
deficient people, and I don't think there's a solution or even a very good system to deal with that. If they've committed a crime, they get arrested. If they are having an actual break from reality, or you know that far gone, then they can get evaluated. But no matter what path they've taken, one of those two is, if they get arrested, they charges either get dropped because it's petty larceny, and you know the store doesn't care enough to press the charges, and they just get released, and it's a waste of a day for everybody. Or they go to
Mhm.
the psych ward to get an evaluation, and they just get discharged like the next day. You know, to no fault
Yeah.
of, you know, I won't go into like the the medical field and all of that stuff, but they get discharged the next day. So
Well,
now
there's
you've
no
got
one there to pay for it either, like, it's our
yeah,
medical system in this country is really messed up, so
yeah,
it all just plays everything plays off each other.
yeah. You also can't
Beatrix has
mandate
one more
anything, right?
question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can't mandate
Is
somebody to do
there
something.
Well, that's it, exactly, like, if
Yeah,
someone, yeah. Well, I mean, there's also this situation of people using prison as a way to get mental health treatment or to get mental health, to get access to their psych meds. Like that's the only time is when they've committed a crime and they're in jail that they're actually going to get any treatment or psych meds. And that's a huge problem with getting those people access to Medicaid. In a lot of places, you can't just get Medicaid because you're poor. You have to like have a child or something like that. So like that's not available to adult men just because they're poor. And if you're mentally ill on top of that, like maybe you get on disability, maybe you don't. That's like its whole other thing. So yeah. Is there widespread understaffing? Do cops have to respond to calls that should otherwise be handled by outreach crisis staff that waste police resources? So I think we kind of just covered that. Like, it's like there's these other issues that are maybe creating crime situations that like don't need to be, like homelessness, drug addiction. So let's just move on real quick. Because we said an hour and a half, but I don't know your schedule if you could go a little bit longer. Few minutes. Okay, so we did want to talk a little bit about why, what experiences that domestic violence victims have with the police. And this is based on a survey. This is not a scientific study. It's a survey of women calling a DV hotline, and it's a voluntary survey. So as far as data, it's not like the most rigorous, but I think it is representative of a lot of women's experiences. So why don't women call the cops? 92% were afraid, obviously. They were afraid of police blaming and not believing the victim, the police doing nothing. They were afraid of the police arresting the perp. Like, oh my gosh, that just like, you're being abused and you don't want anything to happen to the user. And I don't blame women in that experience or in that situation, because there's a lot mentally going on there where they're,
how do you go forward from there, right? If you're coming back to the apartment after they've been arrested and released, now what?
Right, exactly. That's what I'm saying, is that you're probably in such a more serious situation because they're going to retaliate against you at that point. I mean, there's so much of this, like when a woman gets a restraining order against somebody, that actually can make them more violent, obviously then the police have a lot more leeway of what they can do and charge the person with. It becomes like a much, much greater charge, because then at that point it's they're going against the court's order.
Exactly. That's a big deal.
Anyways, and they want to keep the domestic violence private. I know where I used to live, they had a police blotter, and they would say what address they went to, and it was in the newspaper every week. So whatever the crime was and whoever they arrested, the name would be in there. And that newspaper everybody in the town got. And a lot of small town, it's a lot of car accidents and stuff like that, but there would be things like that, and it would and there would be people I knew from high school who would be in the police blotter, and it was just this very embarrassing way to like shame people. But I could see, you don't want your address, you don't want your name or your husband or boyfriend's name showing up in the newspaper and stuff like that. So keeping it private. You don't want a car with flashing lights outside of your house and feeling there's like a sense of embarrassment that you did something wrong. And of course retribution, and also protecting children, because a lot of times these abusers are threatening children as well. And Useless Strawberry says Stockholm syndrome is real. They have a relationship with the perp, so of course they want to protect them.
Sad situation.
I also just want to mention, you guys are talking about the New Year's stream. It's not private. It's on my channel. So if that's the one that Joan is on, if you guys feel like watching that, it's up there. It's the one that's called Black Pill New Year. So you have to go not to the videos, but to the live section of my channel. Okay. Anyways, I'm just looking at the chat. People are talking about that. Okay. So when they do call the police, 25% of the time, the victim is threatened with arrest, and that's very uncomfortable. 40% of the time they felt calling didn't make any difference. 40% felt less safe after calling. I think that could have a lot to do with that retaliation. Not that they're afraid of the police are making them feel less safe, but they're feeling less safe in the domestic violence situation. One
Yeah.
out of 5 did feel safer after calling, which is good. And 70% would have preferred a different resource, for example, a social worker. So I just want to get into that. I think this is like the end. It's close to the end of, yeah, this is the end of our slideshow, and then we have a few questions. So this idea, and I feel like we heard a lot of this in 2020 after the George Floyd thing, and it was this crisis moment of policing in this country and kind of like coming to a reckoning of what is the role of cops in this. I started the stream off by talking about that cops have these sort of 3 different roles. Optimally, the third one wouldn't exist, but that they're helpers because they are who you call when you are in trouble. You call 911, cops show up. They are crime, they're involved in crime fighting, so they address that. And then sometimes they're aggressors and agitators and stuff like that. It happens. You can acknowledge that.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
And optimally, most of your job would be the helper role if there was like no crime or less crime or whatever. But this idea of sending social workers, I think is so goofy. Like, I can't believe that ever came up, because when you know that these are the most dangerous jobs that cops go on, to send a social worker in, who most of them are female, most of them are older, the average age of a social worker is 44, you're going to send them into a situation where some guy's got a knife or some guys just hit a woman, and you're going to send another woman in there, knowing how he feels about maybe even women in general, not just that specific one. It's such a dumb concept to me. There's also way fewer social workers than there are cops, so it would just be incredibly overburdening. And yeah.
Yeah, you and I talked offline about this. It's part of the defunding the police was not necessarily like that the cops need less money, but people think that it would be a better idea to take money from the police and put it into resources like social workers to have them staffed at the precinct.
Right.
I think one thing that will never change is that the first people on scene, right? EMT and fire department will not go into a scene that's not safe, right? So police have to show up to control the scene, right? That's the big thing that I've said to you is the scene needs to be controlled. I don't care about anything else that happens. Who's the victim or anything.
And from my experience, I've had a couple of times where I've had a medical emergency and called 911 for the ambulance, and cops always show up first. And then they're like, what's going on? Can I just tell you like a really okay, I had one time where I was like just having really a lot of bleeding, uterine bleeding. Okay. Like it was an emergency, I thought, because I had never experienced anything like that. Like I thought it was like hemorrhaging or something. I had no clue what was going on. And so this cop, I called 911 at like 4 a.m. And where I lived, the ambulance was run by high schoolers. Like it was a program they had an adult overseeing it, but the EMTs were in high school, and they even drove it and everything. But so I think probably especially because they were high schoolers, they always had a cop show up first to ambulance jobs. And so this cop comes to my house at 4 a.m, and I'm like describing how I'm like bleeding. Like he just looked at me, like he had a bag and everything. Like he was probably trained EMT too, but he was just like, oh my God, what am I doing here? Anyways, awkward.
No, yeah.
But yeah, like your point is that in any first responder situation, that the cop has the most experience and training and resources to take the situation from potentially where someone could actually get hurt from violence to something where people can do their job.
Yeah, and at that point, if you wanted to bring in a social worker, I think that would be tremendous. Absolutely tremendous. I have no
Mhm.
issue with that at all. But no one in their right mind who has ever had to do this job, who, to go to multiple jobs and understands the actual function and how these jobs play out, would ever send just anyone other than a police officer to the location first to make sure things are under control. Because you can go to 60 jobs in a row and it's nothing, and then you go to one job and there's someone dead with their head chopped off on the floor, right? Like you just don't know, and that's happened before. um,
Mhm.
I've gone to all of those jobs, and I've gone to the head chopped off job. So, to send in a social worker without first having a police officer there is would be the dumbest thing that any department could ever do. Once things are
Yeah.
safe and under control, I'm putting quotes, air quotes up. Once they're safe and under
Mhm.
control, in a sense, if you want to bring a social worker in to talk with a traumatized victim, absolutely, we'll be happy to do
Yeah.
that. But I'm not going to have a social worker walking in between me and a possible suspect that could have a knife anywhere on him, or walk to the
Mhm.
kitchen and get a knife. And now I've got a victim, a social worker who could be a victim, a partner who could be a victim, and myself who could be a victim. It just doesn't work like that.
Yeah. All right. So rapid fire, because we're time wise. I mean,
Mhm.
I don't keep you too long.
You're
So I
good.
had
What?
some questions from what? I don't have anywhere to go, but
No, no, I'm fine. I
if
said you're good.
you,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, cool. So I had a few questions from subscribers, and um, my Scott says, uh, have you actually seen someone with their head cut off? Or you were just saying that
Yeah.
as
So
like,
yeah, quick story with that is responded to a job where I don't remember the exact details a while ago, but I think it was the mother or someone that knew the person called up and said, "Hey, I haven't seen Jen in a couple
oh,
days. She lives at this apartment. It's ROI, so SOI, single occupancy room, SOR, right? SOR. Um, I haven't seen her in a couple days. I haven't heard from her. She's supposed to be at work. Would you mind going out to check on her?" So it's a wellness check at this point. We show
yeah.
up. Roommate answers the door. "Hey, how's it going?" "Yeah, we're looking for Jen." "Oh, she's in her room." He steps aside. We walk in. Um, and I'm telling the story from I didn't show up first. I showed up like I was probably like
Yeah.
sixth officer
You
on scene.
saw, okay, yeah.
Yeah,
It
and
was
so
a
these
dead
two
body.
yeah, and they walk into the room, and there she is with her head chopped off on the floor, bleeding out. She'd probably been there for like a day or something.
Whoa! Wait, did you
Um,
see it?
yeah, yeah, I saw it.
Oh my god. And you have had PTSD from an experience you had on the job, and you have had the
I did. We can't tell that
was
story because that
no,
that
we
is
can't
too.
tell that story. That's like revealing information. But
Yes,
you
but I was
you
involved in a situation where a police officer died, and I had to do CPR on him. He did not make it, but yes, that hung with me for quite some time. This
it's
specific
amazing
thing.
to me, it's amazing that you would oh, this specific thing with the woman with her head chopped off. What did you want to say about that?
Just that
You
that
don't
is
get
not.
like go on.
No, that's just not something that I get wrapped up in anymore. Those are just things that happen in life. They're sad. They bother me. You get past it. And not everybody has. I happen to think, not patting myself on the back, but I happen to think I have some pretty good coping mechanisms. Not
Yeah,
all officers are like that, right? There's degrees of who should be on this job and who shouldn't be on this job. I think after you see enough stuff, people call it police humor, right? Cop humor. We joke about
right,
things that are a little bit darker. You develop. I mean, I will say the one thing that never kind of goes away is when children are involved. That's always a very
right.
um, that's a tough situation when kids are involved because they're so innocent. Not that women aren't in domestic situations. I'm not trying to say that, but children, for some reason, they kind of tug at your heartstrings a
Yeah,
little
of
bit more than anybody
course.
else. But after a
Yeah.
while, you kind of it's a thing that happened. It's terrible. I didn't know the person. I feel terrible for that person. But that kind of just is a thing that happens.
So
Do
you
I need
become
therapy for it?
kind you
Not me personally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you have had therapy, which I think is good because a lot of people aren't even receptive
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
that.
Not okay.
But what was I gonna say? Like, yeah, I forgot. Okay, anyways. Let's see. Got another question here. How does the fact that only one side called the cops change your perspective? I've seen a few cases where I've gotten it wrong, and I wonder if it's a matter of who called first. But you don't know who called. You just get a 911 call, go
No.
to this address, and this is what's happening. And then you
No.
just show
No.
up
We do.
and you
No.
know,
No. We do. Yeah.
you do know
Yeah.
who called.
Yeah. We can call back central, or we can raise her over the air, and we could say, hey, who called this in, and she'll say, female named Jen called it in, and then we find Jen, and she's the one is the primary call. She gets the benefit of the doubt to begin with. It doesn't mean that she gets everything she wants, but if she calls it in, we kind of like
Okay.
she is the victim according to us as we
Right.
walk in. It's that simple.
So
If
you
things
would
change,
prioritize.
exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
the first call is very important. I would say, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
And this question, I've never heard of this. Was he trained with that killology concept? Is that something you've heard of?
Killology? I've never heard that term.
Yeah.
No. What
Okay.
does that mean?
Also curious about, I think this question was good. His POV on how kids are supposed to be treated during DV interventions. Do cops take them aside, question them? You kind of were touching on that a second ago.
Yeah. Absolutely. Kids are very important in that. The age of the child, I'm not going to take a 3-year-old's word for gold,
Right.
but if it's a younger kid and I get him aside and the kid says, Daddy was hitting mommy, right?
Right,
That's a
kids
great
are
piece of
pretty honest, like, they haven't developed that. I mean, they'll lie and fabricate certain things, but then, they'll also be very candid and, like, even when the parents want them to keep things quiet, they won't.
Exactly. So you know that I don't know. It's a concept, right? That if you ask somebody a question, right, that you want to know the answer to, you're probably going to get the answer because people feel good about giving you the right answer. They feel like they're important, right? So if I asked you to like go on
Mm,
about astrology, right? Hey, I was wondering what's the sign between January and February, right? And you're going to answer me, right? Or if I, that type of concept where people like they feel rewarded inside when they can give answers, right? So if you ask a
mhm,
kid, like, hey, how you doing today? Oh, those your stuffed animals? Oh, what's the name of this one? And then you segue that into, hey, so what happened earlier? Mom called us. What's going on? Right. And he'll now, instead of, trying to defend anyone, right? Because they're too young to like really
mm,
understand that. Instead of defending, they're going to get this reward out of telling what happened. Hey, I get to tell what happened, right? I get to tell this cop, the situation. So, and again, not that it's gold, but I can take that piece of information and hand it over to the district attorney. Hey, listen, I talked to the child. This is what the child told me on the scene. Um, I think it's important,
mhm,
and then who knows? Maybe the district attorney pulls that kid in and questions him more, or if it's severe enough, maybe the detective squad does. But yeah, absolutely,
mhm.
I'll talk to the kids. I think that's important.
Yeah, very interesting.
Wait, I'm curious.
Okay,
What's the
and
kill emoji?
I don't know what that is. We have to
Oh,
Google
okay. We'll
it.
have to look. We'll have to look that up. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if that's I mean, someone said shoot to kill, which, I mean, obviously that's what you're trained to do,
Oh yeah, yeah.
right?
If I'm firing my weapon, it's not to shoot them in the leg. That's not like a thing. You don't aim to shoot somebody in the leg. It's anyone that would state that that's a thing has either never shot a gun in their life or never been in a situation where their adrenaline goes up to 10 on a scale and
Yeah.
has to make a shot. It's not a thing. And listen, we could open up a can of worms here, but we're not going to. What I would say is what is supposed to be trained, what is trained, right? And what should,
Right.
I'm gonna emphasize that what should be done is a police officer should not, right, take their gun out, point it at somebody, or pull the trigger unless they're in fear of that person ending their life, like as the
Right.
officer, or another victim in the area. That's the only reason.
Of
So
course.
when you say something like that, the theory should be is a bullet should not exit that gun unless there is the fear of deadly physical force being used against them or another person. So yeah,
Absolutely.
we're not shooting
Yeah,
legs
makes
out.
no
We're not
sense.
shooting hands out. Center mass is what's taught. You're aiming for center mass, um, and that's it.
And you would only and something I don't know if everyone knows this, but most cops never even like draw their gun, like let alone
Yeah,
shoot it. I mean, the
I
the
mean,
percentage of cops that actually shoot their gun ever in their entire career is like
oh, it's
so
ridiculous.
low.
Yeah, when you talk
Yeah,
about the millions
it's
of
just doesn't
officers
happen.
who
It's
do that, mhm.
I think people have a skewed view because of TV and movies and stuff like that, but it's actually so rare.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if it's the federal statistics that I had seen written recently, um, but it's like a percentage of cops
Yeah,
nationwide have ever fired their firearm for any reason. I
right,
think you and I have talked about this. The police are the physical representation of things that people don't like about society when it comes to regulations, laws, all that type of stuff.
right.
You know,
Yeah,
no no
that's
cop in
kind of
their
been a
life has
theme
ever
of this.
made.
Yeah,
Sorry. No cop in their life has ever made a law or legislation. So
right,
it's one of those things where uh, there's a lot of like directed hate towards police for, I won't say the wrong reasons, but maybe just like not the best direction for it, because cops have their
right.
function, and I think people see them as a physical representation of something they can lash out at. Not that cops don't have their faults or they haven't done things in the past, or policing in the 50s wasn't terrible, and completely whatever you want to call it, racist or sexist or biased towards people. I'm not even going to go there, but modern policing has come a long way from that, and I think you know
Yeah,
it's a tough
and I think
situation.
yeah, you know, we've come back to that idea a few times, but it's like cops being the people that civilians have they have the interaction with and they have the direct experience with, but they are just like the tip of this iceberg that's the whole criminal justice system or the whole justice system, and something that it's just much harder to like actually get face to face time with like your legislator, to air
Yeah.
grievances about things, right? Like,
Hmm.
anyways, so I think this is our last question. Maybe there's one other. Okay, so this is our second to last question from Joan, who's a friend of the channel. Where does he think concerning cases? What does he think about concerning cases? Where does he think concerning cases get dropped the most? Is it police officers on the scene not recording? Is it whoever they report incidents to not taking it seriously, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, that does
So
make sense. I think what
we've kind of touched on that a little bit.
I think where it comes into, we say this a lot when we go to jobs, right? If there's no victim, right? Let me say this first before people jump on it. If there's no victim, there's no crime, right? Um, I think where cases get dropped is the victims of the crimes don't follow through, are not interested in following through, whether it's, and I'll go the gamut, right? It's pettit larceny from Walgreens, right? The store itself, the manager has to press charges, has to call up and talk to the
Mm,
district attorney as a representative of that store and say, I would like to press charges on this person for stealing, this and this item, right? What's going to
mhm.
happen? The store says, I can't be bothered. Loss is a percentage of what they know that they're going to lose for the year, and they don't care and they don't press those charges. When it comes to domestic violence, right? In my opinion, without statistics, I will say that it's probably the victim. From what I've seen, the victim chooses for whatever reason to not press charges, whether
Right.
they can't, whether they're intimidated, whether they're going to go back to the abuser, whether they can't leave the situation, whatever it is. I think the cases get dropped mainly like you would if you were able to pull off statistics from Google. I think the dropped cases are specifically from victims not wanting to press the charges. And most of the time,
Mhm.
the state or the city can press the charges for domestic violence if it's bad, if they deem it bad enough. Um, but other than that, you need a victim to press charges. Otherwise, there's no case. The second a victim says,
Mhm.
okay, I don't want to press charges, that's it, end of story. So that's my opinion.
Um, okay, this person had a long question. But basically, let's see. They say we often hear about how there are good cops and bad cops, and it's the system that fails. But like, what does that actually mean? Where does the system actually break down and protect the wrong people from accountable? I mean, I feel like we've been talking about this point the whole time. It's just the last question too. It's like, where does the system break down? Do you like good cops and bad cops, that kind of stuff? Like, can you speak on that a
Yeah,
little bit? Like, what,
yeah,
something that you and I talked about privately is, well, some people will say ACAB, or they'll say if you have one bad cop and 99 good cops, you have 100 bad cops and stuff like that. And
yeah.
I don't know.
So what I will say is I'll split that into two categories, right? There's actual corruption, right, which is we would consider that a bad cop, and then there's like people not doing their job as good as we as society thinks they should do. There
Hmm.
are for all cops multiple overseeing organizations, agencies that oversee police officers. One is the Internal Affairs Bureau. If there's
Yeah, you
actual
don't have to.
corruption,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, if there's actual corruption, those internal affairs agencies will investigate those cops. They'll do undercover stings. They'll do whatever they need to track that person, and they will find out if that cop is actually corrupt. It happens more than it doesn't. But the statistic for that is like I think it's something like 1.5, 2% are cops that are actually doing corrupt, like planting evidence that wasn't there, stealing
it
money from police
reflects
cars.
on all cops though. That's the problem. And do you get mad at that? Like when those people killed George Floyd, like do you get angry about that it's like, okay, now when I go to a job, they're gonna think I'm like that, you know?
Well, yeah, it's not that I get mad,
And
but
you're
it's
not.
a sad situation. Yeah, it's a sad situation. It's always in the back of
I
my
would
mind
feel
when I'm
pretty
interviewing.
resentful if someone who did the same job I did, who in a sense you all represent each other, and
Yeah,
then someone did that and committed that horrible violence or whatever.
yeah. Well,
And
so I give you an example that I think about that maybe, who knows, maybe it's not the best example, but you remember Galloping Gertie? I remember, I love that story. It's like the bridge back in the
the
whatever, like
bridge.
19, yeah,
Yeah.
1920s or
Yeah.
whatever. And, whatever engineer designed it.
Right.
I guess the concrete didn't have like enough reinforcing in it. The winds got too
Right.
high. It rattled until it fell over, right? Do we hate all engineers
Yes.
now? Like, are they all dumb and ineffective,
Yeah,
right? How many There's been recent building collapse. There was one in Miami, right? Like you don't hate all engineers because of it. The problem with cops is they're tasked with taking away your liberty, your freedom, which is a tough
right.
situation to be in. And you know, when somebody says all cops are bad, I think that's an unintelligent comment to make. I think they just haven't been around, have enough life experience. That's a tough comment to make for it to be taken seriously, especially when the statistics
There's more
for
like so much more nuance to it.
yeah, it's just a sad situation. And actually, what I'll tell you, what I found out from being a police officer, walking around a majority, like 100% minority community that I policed when I was a patrol cop,
Mhm.
is I would say like 90% of the population walks around. Thank you so much, officer. I appreciate you being here. I wish there were
Yeah.
more of you on each corner. Thank you so much. I feel so much safer. That's what you get, right? You can go to the media and the media says whatever they want. What I found, in fact, is that a small percentage of the population commits the crime. They're the recidivists. And the rest of the population are good people that are just trying to live their lives, get ahead in this crazy society. And they're actually very appreciative of the work that the police do. And they're not on the side of that, that all cops are bad, that all the police need to be removed and, the system's that broken. I don't find that. That's not my personal experience. And I specifically work with a majority minority community. No.
Right. I think something that some departments do is this sort of community police where they're like proactively going out and meeting people and talking to business owners and going to churches and things like that, where they're trying to create relationships so that when those people do need to call, they
Yeah.
they feel comfortable calling 911. They readjust their view of cops as this antagonistic kind of force,
Yeah.
readjust their view to seeing them more in the helper role,
Hmm.
because at the end of the day, I mean, most cops are just people like doing a job, like everybody
Yeah.
else. And it just happens to be a job where sometimes there are these high stress, violent situations, and sometimes it goes wrong. And sometimes there are people, I mean, just like in any job, just like you're saying, do people get mad at engineers or whatever? It's like, in any job, they're going to be like jerks. It's just that when a cop is a jerk, he has the power to enact violence on someone, and then that makes the news, and then people
Yeah.
have this opinion of
What's the other
cops.
thing you can
And
think of? Is that, not to cut
what's
you off, but is there something else you can think of why cops are considered that, or they're looked at that way, as like the
Is
jerks?
this like a question like the answer to?
Yeah, yeah. Well, so my opinion is that we don't show up to fun things, right? Everything that
Right,
I respond to
exactly.
is some sort of crime. I'm not showing up for somebody going, "Hey, look what I baked today," right? It's, "Hey,
But
this
that's what
person
I'm
assaulted
saying.
me."
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah,
right. You're not a cake baker, but like
yeah.
that's what I was kind of saying at the beginning of the stream, and introducing my experiences with police is like, um we are most shaped by our firsthand experiences, and then we're shaped by things we read in the news and statistics that we hear and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And I feel very fortunate, and I do recognize it as a form of privilege, that virtually all my experiences with police have been like very positive and helpful. And if I had to call 911 for some reason, and think that a cop is going to show up, um I would think that someone is coming to help me, not someone is
Mhm.
coming to hurt me. And I know that not everybody has that view, but I think, like I was saying about community policing and stuff like that, things that can actively I don't want to say retrain, but like, reestablish the way that people in communities think about police, and also putting like a face to it too. The police isn't just like some random person. It's like someone you actually can like banter with or whatever. Um so yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think we're coming up on 2 hours. You have the gift of gab, my friend. You're very you're very
You
easy to talk
you
to,
make
and
it
you
very
have a lot to say.
Yeah, you make it easy. You're very good, I don't know what the word is. It's not orator, narrator. What do you push the conversation along very nicely. Yeah.
Oh, thank
You're
you.
right.
Appreciate that.
You're
And
welcome.
I really appreciate you coming on. I know, again, I'll just mention, like I did at the beginning, that not everyone seemed comfortable with me entertaining this conversation, but I think it's been a really great conversation. You have so many insights into things that, again, a lot of us have our firsthand experiences with, but they're just our experience. And, you've seen these things hundreds of times, and you definitely bring a different perspective to it. And
Mm.
yeah, so thank you so much for um this is nice. Thank you. um Thank you so much for coming on. And yeah, if there's another topic that we can talk again, I would love to have you back on. um I think,
Absolutely.
yeah, this topic of male violence will never stop fascinating me. And I know you've watched my videos, and like my stances on things. Of But you've seen a lot of this stuff firsthand, where I talk about a lot of it theoretically, and you've actually witnessed it firsthand. This experience with particularly male violence. And I mean, I personally think it's very heroic, like the work that you do, and that you go into situations like you went into a couple weeks ago, where you are like risking your life to save a woman. Like, you do that, and I don't know. it probably takes a special person to do that. So yes, thank you for all you do.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We try.
And thanks to everyone who came in the chat and asked questions. Really appreciated that. And I will see you all soon. All right. Have a great day, everybody. Bye.